The sun hung low in the sky like a glowing orange coin, throwing soft light over the wide, dusty plains of Arizona. The land stretched far in every direction, quiet and endless. A warm wind moved through the tall grass, making it sway like a golden ocean. In the distance, a lone rider appeared on a chestnut horse moving at an easy pace. His name was Jack Donovan. Jack was not the kind of man who liked crowds or noise. He preferred the company of the land and his horse more than the busy sound of towns. His wide-brimmed hat shaded his face from the sun, and his shirt was faded from many years under the open sky. His boots, though worn, fit him perfectly, like they were part of him. Everything about him said he belonged to the land. Jack had spent the morning working near a cattle ranch. It had been a long day of moving slow cattle across uneven ground. Now he was on his way back toward his small camp near the river. He liked that river. It was calm, and when the sun set, the light touched the water in a way that made everything feel peaceful. For a man like Jack, peace was everything. The horse beneath him was strong and gentle. Jack called him Dusty because wherever they went, Dusty's hooves stirred the ground into soft clouds of sand. Dusty had been with him for years. They understood each other without needing many words. Jack trusted the horse like an old friend. As they followed the river's curve, the air smelled fresh, a mix of warm earth and cool water. Jack took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a second, letting the wind brush against his face. He didn't often talk even to himself, but in moments like this he felt alive in the silence. He liked that no one expected anything from him out here. The world seemed wide and open, like it had space for someone who didn't quite fit anywhere else. Jack had grown up not too far from these plains. He had learned to ride before he learned to read. He had helped neighbors mend fences, carried water for tired horses, and spent nights listening to old men talk around campfires. Life had never been easy, but Jack didn't mind. Hard work gave him a reason to wake up every morning. The sun slowly began to dip lower, painting the land in soft gold and rose colors. Shadows grew longer. Birds flew in small groups across the glowing sky. Jack gently patted Dusty's neck and whispered, "Almost there, boy." The horse gave a soft snort as if he understood. They passed a grove of tall cottonwood trees near the riverbank. Jack liked this part of the trail. The sound of leaves rustling in the breeze always made him feel at ease. Somewhere nearby, a small stream joined the river, making a soft, bubbling sound like laughter. Jack smiled without realizing it, but as calm as the world around him was, Jack's heart carried quiet weight. He often wondered what life would be like if he hadn't chosen to live alone. Some men built houses and raised families. Jack built a fire and watched stars. He didn't regret it exactly, but sometimes when the nights grew too quiet, he felt a small empty space inside him, a space he couldn't fill with the sound of rivers or the warmth of fire. That evening he planned to reach his camp before dark. It wasn't much, just a small tent, a fire pit, and a few tools. But it was enough. He liked simple things. He liked knowing where everything was. Life was easier that way. As they neared the bend in the river, Dusty slowed down on his own. Jack looked ahead. The water shimmered like a sheet of glass in the fading light. A few dragonflies hovered near the surface, their wings shining in the sun. The gentle sound of flowing water filled the air. Jack thought of how many times he had passed this same spot and never tired of it. He guided Dusty closer to the river's edge to let him drink. The horse lowered his head and Jack swung one leg over and slid off the saddle, landing softly on the sandy bank. He stretched his arms and let out a slow breath. He felt the kind of tired that came from honest work, the good kind. Jack crouched down, scooped a handful of cool water, and splashed it on his face. The water trickled down, carrying away the heat of the day. For a few moments he closed his eyes, listening to the world around him. It was calm. Only the river, the wind, and a faraway bird's call. As the minutes passed, the sun continued its slow journey down, and the light grew softer. Jack knew this land well. He knew how the river curved, where the rocks were slippery, and where the ground dipped low. But tonight something felt a little different. Not wrong, just different. The kind of difference that makes a man look twice. He straightened and glanced across the river. The water moved gently, but a few ripples caught his eye. They weren't from fish or the wind. It was something else. A slight disturbance, as if the river had taken a quiet breath. Jack narrowed his eyes. He wasn't the kind of man to panic easily. Out here, nature always had its little surprises. He walked a few steps closer to the water's edge, his boots sinking into the soft sand. Dusty lifted his head, ears twitching, sensing Jack's change in attention. Jack scanned the far side of the river, but everything looked ordinary. Maybe it was just a fish, or maybe a branch had fallen in, but the feeling didn't leave him. Jack stayed there for a moment, his hand resting on Dusty's neck, watching the water. It was strange how quiet everything had become. The birds weren't chirping anymore. The wind had slowed. The world seemed to hold its breath. Jack wasn't afraid, but he was alert. Years of living close to nature had taught him to listen when silence speaks. He told himself it was probably nothing. He could set up camp, light a fire, and tomorrow would be just another day. But something deep inside, the same quiet instinct that had kept him safe all these years, whispered that the night might not be as ordinary as it seemed. He decided to stay a little longer by the river before setting up camp. He loosened Dusty's saddle to let the horse rest. The air grew cooler as the last light began to fade. The sky was turning soft pink and orange, and the first star blinked faintly in the east. Jack leaned against a rock, arms crossed, watching the water. He thought about how the river had been here long before him and would remain long after. It carried stories, maybe more stories than any book. Stories of storms, travelers, lost treasures, and quiet moments like this. He had always liked to imagine that the river was a keeper of secrets. He didn't know it yet, but the river was about to hand him one of its secrets, one that would change everything he thought he knew about himself and the quiet life he led. In that moment, Jack was just a man and his horse, alone in the warm glow of a summer evening. But in just a few heartbeats, he would no longer be just a quiet cowboy passing through. He would become part of someone else's story, and someone else would become part of his. Jack stayed near the river longer than usual that evening. The sun was now sinking behind the distant hills, leaving a soft orange glow that spread across the sky like paint on canvas. The air had cooled and a light breeze brushed against his face. Dusty stood quietly beside him, head lowered, ears moving slightly every time a cricket chirped or a leaf rustled. Something inside Jack told him not to leave yet. He didn't know why. He had learned to trust these quiet feelings. Out here, in the open land, instincts often saw what the eyes missed. He crouched down, picking up a small flat stone and tossing it into the water. It made 3 neat skips before sinking below the surface. The ripples moved slowly, circling outward, then disappeared. But not long after, new ripples appeared. Not from his stone this time. They were larger, uneven, and carried a strange rhythm. Jack straightened. His eyes narrowed slightly. He had traveled this stretch of river many times, and the water usually ran smooth here. Something, or someone, was moving out there. He stepped closer to the edge, careful not to make sudden sounds. Dusty shifted his weight and gave a soft, uncertain snort. Jack rested a hand gently on the horse's neck. "Easy, boy," he whispered. The horse calmed down but kept its head turned toward the river. The water shimmered in the fading light, and that's when Jack saw it. Something pale near the center of the river. At first it looked like a drifting branch, but then it moved against the current for a brief moment before dipping below again. Jack's heartbeat quickened, not in fear but in alertness. He knew this river well. Its current could look gentle on the surface but turn surprisingly strong underneath. A person caught in the middle could tire quickly, and if they didn't know how to handle the pull, they could disappear in seconds, without wasting time. Jack unhooked the rope coiled on Dusty's saddle and looped it around the nearest tree trunk. He tied it tight. Years of living out here had made him quick and precise with knots. Dusty gave a soft shake of his head as if to say, "I'll be here when you get back." Jack kicked off his boots and stepped into the shallows. The cold water wrapped around his legs like a sudden rush of ice. It was deeper toward the middle, but he didn't stop to think twice. He moved with steady, strong steps, pushing forward. For a few seconds, he lost sight of the pale shape. The river had a way of hiding things beneath its calm face. Then he saw it again, a figure turning slightly with the current. A person. A woman. Jack's jaw tightened. He moved faster now, water rising to his waist, then to his chest. The current pressed against him, but he leaned into it, remembering every step he'd taken in this river over the years. His hands cut through the water as he swam toward her, careful not to waste energy. The woman floated on her back now, but her head tilted to one side. Her long dark hair fanned out like a dark halo around her face. Jack could tell she wasn't moving on purpose. She was drifting. The current had control. Jack reached her just before the water could pull her into a deeper section. He grabbed her gently but firmly by the shoulders. Her skin felt cold and colder than the water. Her eyes were closed and her lips had lost some of their color. Jack's breath caught in his throat for a brief moment. He spoke softly, though he wasn't sure if she could hear. "I've got you now." His voice was calm. Out here, panic only made things worse. Jack pulled her toward the shallows, using strong, even strokes. His arms ached and the river pushed back, but he didn't stop. Little by little, the water grew shallower again. His boots were still tied to the horse's saddle on shore, but his feet found the sandy river bottom beneath him. That gave him strength. He lifted her into his arms and waded the last few steps to the bank. The world around them was quiet except for the sound of water sliding past. Jack carefully laid her down on the soft sand, turning her so her head rested gently to the side. For a moment he knelt there, breathing hard, drops of water sliding down his face. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time. She was young, maybe in her early 20s. Her hair was long and black, her skin warm-toned, and she wore a light traditional dress that clung to her from the water. She wasn't a stranger to the land. Jack could see it in the way her clothes matched the earth's colors. Jack touched her wrist. Her pulse was faint. She wasn't breathing properly. His heart tightened, but he didn't allow fear to take root. He remembered what he had learned years ago. A traveling nurse had shown him how to help someone whose breathing had stopped. It was a lesson he had never thought he would actually use. He tilted her head back slightly to keep her airway clear. He checked for signs of breathing again, listening closely. The only sound he heard was the river flowing behind him. Jack started chest compressions, his hands placed carefully at the center of her chest. He pressed gently but firmly, counting each compression in his head. His hands moved in a steady rhythm, matching the beat of his heart. The sky had turned a deeper orange now, and shadows stretched across the sand. The sound of the river mixed with Jack's breathing as he continued. After several compressions, he leaned down, giving her 2 soft breaths, then returned to compressions. Minutes felt like hours. Jack kept his mind focused. "Come on," he whispered. "Breathe." Dusty, standing a few feet away, pawed the ground softly as if sensing the tension. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then just when Jack began to wonder if it was too late, the woman coughed. A small, weak cough at first, then stronger. Water spilled from her mouth and she gasped for air like someone who had just woken from a long, strange dream. Jack let out a slow breath of relief and gently rolled her on her side so she could breathe easier. He brushed the wet hair away from her face, careful not to frighten her if she woke suddenly. She was still weak, her breathing uneven but real. That was what mattered most. The woman's eyelids fluttered slightly, but she didn't fully open her eyes. She seemed caught between waking and sleeping. Jack didn't push her. She needed rest. He looked toward the trail, wondering where she had come from. This part of the river wasn't near any big town. But a few miles north, there was a small Apache village. He had passed near it many times while riding. She must have come from there. Jack removed his damp shirt and wrapped it gently around her shoulders to keep her warm. He wasn't sure if she could feel it yet, but he wanted to make sure she didn't get colder. The night air was growing cooler by the minute. He glanced at the sky. The sun was nearly gone now, and stars were beginning to wake one by one. Fireflies danced along the river's edge. It should have been a peaceful night, but Jack's mind was alive with questions. Who was she? What had happened? Why was she alone in the water? But questions could wait. The important thing was that she was alive. He stayed beside her, listening to the soft sound of her breathing and the water flowing nearby. His shirt clung to his back, wet and heavy, but he didn't care. He couldn't leave her alone here. He knew that when she woke, everything might change. But right now, all he felt was a quiet sense of responsibility, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Jack had always been a man who walked alone, speaking to the wind and the stars more than to people. But as he sat there beside the woman he had just pulled from the river, something inside him shifted. It wasn't loud or sudden, more like the quiet movement of water under the surface. The night settled softly around them. Dusty lowered his head, the sound of crickets filled the air, and the stars shone like silent witnesses. Jack didn't know her name, her story, or what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing for sure. This night by the river was not one he would ever forget. The night grew deeper, and the stars spread across the dark sky like tiny lamps. The soft sound of the river filled the air, calm and steady. as if the world itself had slowed down to breathe. Jack sat quietly beside the woman he had rescued, listening to every soft rise and fall of her breath. Each sound was a small reminder that she was alive. He had placed her near the large cottonwood tree not far from the riverbank. Its wide branches stretched over them like a kind shelter, and the sand beneath was soft and warm from the day's sun. Jack had made a small fire a few steps away, not too big, just enough to give warmth and a little light. The orange glow touched their faces gently and flickered in the breeze. Dusty, his loyal horse, stood nearby, calm and alert. Every now and then, the horse lowered its head to graze on the soft grass. Jack glanced at him with quiet gratitude. Dusty had been with him through storms, long rides, and lonely nights. And tonight, as always, the horse stood by him, steady and dependable. Jack turned his attention back to the woman. Her breathing had become more regular, though her face still looked pale in the firelight. Her dark hair lay spread across the sand like a soft blanket, and her clothes were still damp but drying slowly in the gentle heat. He wondered who she was. He had seen Apache families from a distance over the years, traveling near the river, gathering herbs, or fishing along the banks. He respected their ways and always kept a respectful distance. He was a quiet man, and they were a proud people who valued their land deeply. He hadn't planned to be part of anyone's story that day. He had just been a man on a horse heading to his small camp like any other day, but sometimes life changes direction without asking for permission. Jack leaned back against the tree trunk, listening to the night. Crickets sang their soft songs and fireflies blinked near the water like tiny floating stars. It was peaceful, but his mind was full of questions. She might have fallen into the river accidentally, or maybe the current had surprised her while she was crossing. The river could be tricky even for someone who knew it well. He thought of how still she had been when he reached her, like a flower drifting in the water. Her hand moved slightly. Jack straightened at once, his quiet alertness returning. Her eyelids fluttered softly, and she let out a weak breath. Slowly, her eyes opened. They were dark and deep, reflecting the firelight like small mirrors. For a moment, she looked confused, as though she wasn't sure where she was or how she got there. Jack didn't speak right away. He didn't want to startle her. Her gaze moved from the tree above to the river beside her. Then her eyes met his. Jack gave a small, calm nod, letting her know she was safe. "You're all right," he said softly. His voice carried warmth but stayed quiet, almost blending with the sound of the night. She blinked a few times, her lips parting slightly. Her voice was faint but clear. "The river," she whispered. Jack leaned forward just enough for her to hear him better. "Yes," he said. "You were in the river. The current was strong, but you're safe now." She closed her eyes again for a second, as if trying to remember what had happened. Then she opened them slowly, a little more aware this time. "I remember the water," she murmured. "It pulled me fast," Jack nodded gently. "It can do that," he said. "The river looks calm, but it's stronger than it seems." She looked down at herself, noticing that her clothes were damp, then turned her head toward the small fire nearby. Her hands were cold, but the warmth of the flames reached her slowly like sunlight on a chilly morning. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost unsure. Jack shifted slightly, uncomfortable with being thanked but not wanting to ignore her. "You don't have to," he said. Anyone would have done the same, but deep down he knew not everyone would have. Many people would have kept riding, hoping someone else would help. Jack wasn't sure why he had jumped into the river without thinking. He just did. The woman tried to sit up, but she was weak. Jack reached out a steady hand, not forcing her, just offering support. She looked at it for a moment before placing her small, cold hand in his. He helped her sit carefully, making sure she didn't fall back. "Take it slow," he said. "You've been through something hard. You need to rest." She nodded faintly, her wet hair clinging to her shoulders. She drew her knees close and wrapped the shirt he'd given her tighter around herself. The fire crackled softly, and for a long moment, they just sat there in silence. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet that lets the world speak for itself. The rustle of leaves, the call of a distant owl, the steady sound of flowing water. "I'm Nia," she said suddenly, her voice a little clearer now. She looked at him as if waiting to see if he would share his name too. "Jack," he replied simply. He didn't use many words, but when he spoke, it carried honesty. "Jack," she repeated softly, as if testing the name on her tongue. "You saved me." Jack looked into the fire instead of her eyes. "You saved yourself too," he said quietly. "You held on long enough for me to get to you." A small smile touched her lips. It wasn't a big smile, just a quiet one, the kind that says more than words. Jack could see she was still tired, but she was growing stronger with each passing minute. The warmth of the fire and the calm of the night were helping her find her strength again. "Were you crossing the river?" Jack asked after a while, careful not to push too hard. Nia nodded slowly. "I was trying to gather wild plants near the other side," she said. "I didn't think the current would be strong today. I've crossed here many times, but the water moved faster this time. I slipped." Jack listened quietly. He had lived near this river long enough to know how unpredictable it could be. Sometimes a river changes its mood in the blink of an eye. "You were lucky," he said softly. She looked at him with thoughtful eyes. "Maybe it was luck," she said. "Or maybe it was meant to be." Jack didn't answer that. He wasn't a man who thought much about fate or signs, but the way the night had turned out, it almost felt like the river itself had called him to stop. Nia tilted her head slightly. "You were just passing by?" "Yes," Jack said. "Heading back to camp. I stop by the river every evening. It's quiet here." "I'm glad you did," she whispered. The firelight danced in her eyes, making them shine like polished stones. She seemed calmer now. Her breathing was steady, her shoulders less tense. Jack stood up and added a few more small pieces of wood to the fire. The flames rose higher for a moment before settling again. Nia watched him closely. She could tell he was a man who lived with the land, someone who moved through the world quietly but with purpose. "Do you live near here?" she asked softly. "Not far," Jack replied. "I set camp a little down the trail. Just me and Dusty." He glanced at his horse, who was now resting peacefully. She followed his gaze and smiled gently. "Dusty," she said, almost as if she were greeting the horse. Dusty flicked an ear at the sound of his name but didn't move. Jack chuckled softly, a sound he didn't make often. "He's a good listener," he said. Nia wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the comfort of warmth and safety for the first time since she'd fallen into the river. It still felt unreal to her, how a simple trip to gather plants had turned into something so unexpected. She had been alone in the water, fighting for breath, and then this quiet cowboy had appeared like part of the land itself. The night grew colder, but the fire kept them warm. Jack noticed Nia's eyes beginning to grow heavy. "You should rest," he said gently. "You've had a hard day." Nia hesitated for a moment, looking toward the trees, perhaps thinking of her home not far from here. But her body was tired, and the thought of trying to walk in the dark didn't seem wise. She nodded softly. "Just for a little while," she whispered. Jack picked up his bedroll from his saddlebag and placed it near the fire. He kept a respectful distance, giving her space, and then sat on the other side of the flames. Dusty lay down near them, folding his legs beneath him. The night felt safe. Nia lay down carefully, her head resting against her arm. She watched the fire dance for a few moments before her eyes slowly closed. Jack stayed awake a while longer, listening to the night. The stars above seemed brighter than usual. He thought about how one moment of hesitation could have changed everything. If he hadn't stopped, if he hadn't listened to that quiet feeling. He looked at Nia, sleeping peacefully now, and felt something unfamiliar. A quiet sense of connection. He didn't know her story fully, but somehow their paths had crossed in a way that felt bigger than chance. The wind whispered softly through the trees. The river kept flowing as steady as ever, and Jack Donovan, the man who had spent most of his life walking alone, sat beside a fire with someone who might change everything he thought he knew about being alone. The night held its breath, like a secret not yet ready to be spoken. The night slowly gave way to the soft light of morning. The stars faded one by one, and a pale blue color spread across the sky. The river flowed gently, catching the early sunlight and turning it into a silver ribbon that stretched through the land. Birds began to sing softly from the trees, their songs floating in the cool air like music. Jack had been awake long before the first light appeared. He wasn't the kind of man who slept late. Years of living under open skies had trained him to rise with the sun. He sat quietly near the small campfire, which had burned down to warm embers. A thin trail of smoke curled upward, disappearing into the morning sky. Dusty stood near the water, drinking slowly. His chestnut coat shone in the soft light. Jack watched him for a moment, then turned his eyes toward Nia, She was still asleep, wrapped in the shirt he had given her, breathing softly and peacefully. He could see now in the gentle light details he hadn't noticed last night. Her long, dark hair lay across her shoulder like silk. Her skin had regained its warmth. She looked calm, far from the pale, cold figure he had pulled from the water. Jack felt something quiet move inside him, not loud or sudden, just a soft warmth. It wasn't something he was used to feeling. For so long, it had been just him and Dusty against the wide land. But now, sitting by the river with someone else breathing nearby, it felt different. He got up slowly so as not to wake her and walked to the edge of the river. The sand was cool beneath his boots. He crouched down and splashed some water on his face. The coldness woke his senses. He had a long day ahead, but somehow it didn't feel like any ordinary day. Nia stirred softly. Jack looked back and saw her open her eyes, slowly, blinking against the soft morning light. For a moment, she looked, confused again. Waking up under a cottonwood tree by a river isn't something most people expect. Then she remembered, and her expression softened. "Good morning," Jack said in his quiet voice. She sat up slowly, pushing her hair back from her face. "Morning," she whispered back. Her voice sounded gentle, like the wind brushing through tall grass. "You slept well," Jack said. She nodded. "Better than I thought I would. I was tired." Jack gave a small nod in return. "You needed it. The river takes a lot out of a person." Nia looked at the river, its smooth surface glowing in the sunlight. "I thought I wouldn't see another sunrise," she said softly, almost to herself. Jack didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't a man of fancy words. Instead, he crouched down near the fire and added a few small sticks to the embers. A small flame flickered to life again. Nia watched him for a moment, noticing the quiet way he moved. He wasn't trying to be a hero or make a big story out of what happened. He was just steady, calm, like the land itself. "Thank you," she said again, her voice stronger this time. Jack looked at her and gave a simple nod. "You don't have to," he replied softly. But deep down, he felt something warm in his chest, hearing those words. He opened one of his saddlebags and pulled out a piece of bread and some dried fruit. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start the day. He handed her a piece. She accepted it carefully, almost shyly. They ate quietly. Jack liked silence, not the heavy kind that felt awkward, but the kind that felt easy. This silence between them felt easy. The sound of the river, the birds, and the crackle of the fire filled the space between their words. After a while, Nia spoke again. "I should go home soon," she said softly. "My family might be worried. I didn't return last night." Jack nodded. "I can take you," he said simply. "Or at least ride close enough so you don't walk alone." Nia looked surprised. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," Jack replied, "but I want to." There was no big reason behind his offer. He wasn't expecting anything in return. It just felt like the right thing to do. She gave a small smile, one that carried both gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she said once more. Jack packed up the small camp with smooth, practiced movements. He tied his saddle back onto Dusty and checked the rope around the packs. He had done this hundreds of times before, but today it felt a little different. Maybe it was because, for the first time in a long time, someone else was there. Nia stood, a little away from him, brushing the sand from her clothes. The sunlight caught the strands of her dark hair, making it shine softly. She looked stronger than last night, still tired but standing tall. Jack helped her onto Dusty's back. "He's gentle," Jack said. "He won't let you fall." Nia placed her hands carefully on the saddle. Dusty turned his head slightly as if to look at her. She let out a soft laugh. "He's a good horse," she said. Jack climbed up behind her, careful to keep a respectful distance. He held the reins loosely and gave a gentle nudge. Dusty started walking down the trail that followed the river. The morning sun painted everything in warm gold. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of wildflowers and damp earth. For a while, they rode in silence. Nia watched the trees and the river, breathing in the morning air. It felt good to be alive. She thought about the moment in the water when everything had felt so far away. Now, sitting on a horse with the man who had pulled her out, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Jack didn't say much. He was never a talkative man, but he didn't mind the silence. In fact, he liked how it felt. Natural, not forced. It was as if the land itself carried the conversation for them. After some time, Nia spoke softly. "My village isn't far from here," she said. "Maybe half an hour by horse." Jack nodded. "Then we'll get you home soon." She turned slightly to look at him. "Jack," she said quietly, "why did you help me?" Jack met her eyes for a moment before looking back at the path. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "And I was here." Nia tilted her head slightly. "You didn't even know me." Jack's voice was calm. "You don't need to know someone to help them." His words were plain, but something about the way he said them made them feel important. Nia looked ahead, her heart feeling strangely warm. The trail curved gently, leading them through open grassland where the river widened and sparkled in the sun. Wildflowers grew on both sides, their colors bright and cheerful. A group of deer, in the distance, lifted their heads watching them pass, then returned to grazing. Nia breathed deeply, letting the air fill her lungs. She didn't feel the cold weight of the river anymore. Instead, she felt light, almost as if the land itself was giving her a second chance. Jack watched the landscape quietly. He had seen these fields and trees 100 times, but somehow today they looked a little different. Maybe it was because he wasn't seeing them alone. When they finally saw the first smoke rising from the cooking fires of Nia's village in the distance, she sat up straighter. The soft hum of home seemed to pull at her. Children's voices floated through the air faintly, and the smell of bread baking reached them on the wind. Jack slowed Dusty down to a gentle walk. Nia's eyes shone softly as she looked at the place she called home. She had never imagined she might not see it again. "Thank you," she said again, turning to him. "For everything." Jack gave a quiet nod. "I'm glad you're home," he said. They rode a little closer to the edge of the village where the first few houses stood. Nia slid off the horse carefully, steadying herself. Jack held Dusty's reins loosely, watching her with his calm eyes. For a brief moment they just stood there facing each other. The sun shone warmly on both of them. Nia looked at him with a soft smile. "I hope we meet again," she said quietly. Jack tilted his hat slightly, the closest thing to a smile he usually gave. "Maybe we will," he said. She turned and began walking toward the village, her steps light and steady. Jack watched her go, feeling something he couldn't quite name. He didn't know what would happen next. Maybe their paths would cross again, maybe not. But something inside him had changed. The world didn't feel quite as lonely as it had before. Dusty snorted softly, as if agreeing with his thoughts. Jack patted the horse's neck. "Come on, boy," he whispered. He turned Dusty around and began to ride back down the trail, the river shining beside him. The morning was warm, the air full of life, and for the first time in a long while Jack's heart felt lighter. Days passed, and the summer sun grew warmer with each new morning. The river that once almost took Nia's breath away now shone under the light like a silver path, winding through the land. Jack rode the familiar trails again, just as he had done for years. But something in his quiet days had changed. Something soft, something warm. Jack had always been a man who moved like the wind, silent, steady, leaving no trace behind. His world was built of open skies, long rides, quiet rivers, and the company of his loyal horse. But ever since that night when he had pulled Nia from the water, her face had stayed with him, not like a weight but like a quiet thought that returned again and again. He often found himself looking at the river's surface as he passed, remembering the soft flicker of her smile in the firelight. Nia had returned to her village, But her heart had carried that night with her too. In the mornings when she helped her family or in the evenings when she walked near the water, she thought of Jack, the cowboy with calm eyes and quiet strength. Her family had been deeply grateful. They had wrapped her in warm blankets when she came home, their faces full of relief. But she couldn't forget the steady rhythm of Jack's voice when he said, "You're safe now." A few weeks later, when the sun had begun its slow journey toward autumn, Jack rode into the small town to pick up supplies. He tied Dusty near the old wooden post outside the general store. It was a quiet day. Only a few people were walking along the dusty street. The sound of his boots against the wooden porch echoed softly as he stepped inside. He gathered flour, coffee, dried beans, and some rope. He didn't need much. He never did. But as he was paying, he heard soft laughter outside, light and familiar like a breeze through the trees. Jack turned his head slightly and saw her. Nia stood by a small wagon near the market stall, holding a basket filled with herbs and dried flowers. She was talking with an older woman from the village, and there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't dimmed. When she saw him, she paused for a second, surprised. Then a smile slowly spread across her face. Jack's lips didn't quite form a full smile, but his eyes softened, which for him said everything. He stepped outside and she met him halfway, the soft earth crunching under their steps. "Jack," she said, her voice carrying that same gentle tone he remembered. "Nia," he replied simply, tilting his hat slightly. They stood there for a moment, looking at each other, both remembering the night by the river in silence. Some moments don't need big words to be understood. "I wasn't expecting to see you here," she said softly. "I come here once in a while," Jack said. "Need supplies." She looked at the bag he carried and then at Dusty tied nearby. "Dusty looks well," she said with a small laugh. "He's stubborn," Jack said, a hint of humor in his quiet voice. "Doesn't let me rest too long." Nia's laugh was soft but full of life. She felt something gentle settle in her chest, the kind of warmth that doesn't burn but stays. She told him she was in town with some women from her village, selling herbs and baskets they had woven. Jack listened quietly like he always did, giving every word his full attention. When her work was done, they walked together down the dirt road that led out of town. The wind was soft and the golden light of late afternoon wrapped around them. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them felt easy, like it belonged there. When they reached the edge of the river trail, Jack stopped. "This is where I usually head back," he said. Nia nodded slowly. She looked at the river that had nearly taken her life but had also brought them together. "I come here sometimes too," she said. "The river feels different now. Not just water anymore, more like a place that gave me another chance." Jack looked at her, his quiet eyes reflecting the warm light. "It's a strong river," he said softly. "It can take, but it can also give." Nia smiled. "It gave me a friend," she whispered. Jack didn't say anything, but the way he looked at her said more than any words could. He wasn't a man used to friendships. He had spent most of his life moving alone, but hearing her say that word, friend, warmed something deep inside him. They began to meet by the river now and then. Not every day, but often enough to turn silence into something shared. Sometimes she brought a small woven basket of berries or wild honey. Sometimes he brought extra bread from town. Sometimes they didn't bring anything at all, just themselves. She would tell him stories from her village, of the summer dances, the children chasing butterflies, the way her grandmother could read the wind and say when the rain was coming. Jack listened quietly as he always did, letting her words paint colors across the wide plain of his quiet world. He shared little bits of his own life too, not in long stories but in simple lines, of how Dusty had been with him since he was young, of how he liked the sound of rivers more than the noise of towns, of the stars he counted when the night grew too long. One evening, they sat on the riverbank as the sky turned a soft pink. The water reflected the colors like a painting. Nia leaned back against the cottonwood tree where she had once lain half-conscious weeks before. She could still remember the cold water and his hands pulling her to safety. "I was so close to disappearing that night," she said softly. "But you found me." Jack looked out over the water. "The river made sure I was there," he said. She turned to him. "You don't believe in fate, do you?" He paused for a moment. "I believe in listening," he said quietly. That night, something told me not to leave. I listened. That's all, Nia smiled. Then I'm glad you listened. A soft breeze lifted her hair, and for a moment everything around them felt still. The river flowed. The birds called softly from the trees, and the world seemed to breathe along with them. Over time, people from Nia's village grew used to seeing the quiet cowboy who rode near the river. Some would wave as he passed. Children pointed at Dusty, excited by his shiny coat. Jack didn't talk much to anyone, but his calm, respectful ways slowly built a quiet trust. Jack didn't expect anything to change about his life, yet it had. The days didn't feel as empty as before. He still rode alone, but now, there was always a part of him that listened for her laughter in the wind, or expected her to appear by the riverbank with a basket in hand. Nia, too, found herself looking toward the horizon more often. She would walk near the river at sunset, wondering if she'd see the familiar figure of Jack on Dusty. She didn't need promises or grand words. Just seeing him there, steady, silent, and kind, was enough. Then one afternoon, as the sun set and turned the sky a golden red, Nia came down the trail carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Jack was already there, sitting on a rock near the river, watching the water move. She sat beside him and opened the bundle. Inside were small warm bread rolls and a jar of honey. "I thought you might be hungry," she said with a small smile. Jack accepted the bread and honey without fuss. "Thank you," he said simply. They ate quietly, side by side, as the sun lowered itself behind the distant hills. The river glowed with the colors of the sky, and for a moment, everything felt as if it belonged right where it was, you know, she said softly after a long silence. "I don't think I would have believed it then, but I'm glad the river pulled me in that day." Jack looked at her, surprised. "It brought me here," she added gently, "to this moment." To you, Jack didn't know how to answer. He wasn't a man who was good with big, heavy words, but he didn't need to say much. He just looked at her, really looked, and gave a quiet nod. The wind moved softly through the trees. Dusty lowered his head to drink from the water, calm as ever. The world had changed for both of them, not in a loud, sudden way, but slowly, gently, like water shaping stone. Jack had never planned to meet someone like Nia. She had never imagined being pulled from the river by a quiet cowboy. But life has a way of bringing souls together in quiet, unexpected ways. Their story wasn't about grand adventures or loud promises. It was about a single moment that changed everything. A moment by the river when one life was saved, and two lives quietly began to intertwine. The sun finally disappeared below the horizon, and stars began to appear one by one, just like on that first night. Nia leaned her head lightly against the tree, and Jack leaned back beside her. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. The river, the night, and the stars were speaking for them, and in that quiet moment, the lone cowboy and the Apache woman who had once drifted in the water knew their lives had found something rare, a bond born not from words, but from the quiet language of the heart. The river flowed on, carrying their shared silence like a soft, endless song.